The core driver here is that feeling need to feel secure. It's kind of that core logic that influences the thinking, that influences the behavior. And so while there are some maybe similar tendencies in behaviors of a type 6, I would say in this type specifically probably has the widest range of the expression of the type. Um, there's in some Enneagram frameworks you'll hear that there's a specific type called the counterphobic six and then the phobic six. And we'll talk about those when we get to the instinctual biases, because when you overlay those, you get similar you you get that similar representation, and I think it's a little easier to understand. And I like the way that the awareness to action framework talks about that. So the type 6 can be a little tricky to identify because sometimes sixes might identify, am I a 6 or am I an 8? Am I a 6 or am I a 4? Am I a 6 or on the other end, am I a 1? Am I a 6 or am I a 2? Am I a 6 or am I a 9? There are several different kind of type matchups that I see regularly where people get confused about. So hopefully this gives you some insight one way or the other. Some common names for the type 6. Sometimes you'll hear them called the questioner, the skeptic, the devil's advocate. Our awareness to action framework that we use the majority of the time, their leadership style, they have named the type 6 as the guardian. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. And I think you'll see why that is true as we go through this. Like every single type, we need this energy, whether it is an actual person who identifies most as a type 6 and will bringing these strengths to the table, or just as a group, you want to intentionally think about and bring into the team. Things like risk awareness, identifying threats, being prepared, having a plan B or C or D, following through. Yes, everybody likes to get excited about a new idea, but these are the people who are going to also ask the hard questions, not to be a Debbie Downer, not to be negative, but because they really care about the safety for themselves and the safety and security of their team, of the organization. Type sixes are not fearful. I think they get a reputation for being maybe scared or anxious, but really they can be very brave because they have to ask those hard questions when everybody else is just ready to jump in into action. They tend to be really vigilant, very responsible, and really safety oriented. And again, not just for themselves, but because they really do care deeply about their people. And then in this case, their people on their team. They care about the organization. And so even though sometimes those questions might seem like on the receiving end, that they're questioning your authority, that they're slowing the process down, that they are being difficult. Most sixes would say, oh no, it's simply because I care and I want to make sure that we've thought this through before we jump. I talk a lot about our threes, our sevens, our eights, maybe sometimes our ones, depending on the instinctual bias overlap there, are more of a like, let's just jump into action, leap, and the net will appear. Our sixes tend to think, wait a minute, do we know that there's even a possibility that there's going to be a net at the bottom? Like, what's the probability that there's going to be a net? Love that energy, but what's our risk here? And then to mitigate that risk, why don't we pack a parachute? Let's plan on packing one of those. And that is so important on a team and an organization. So you're not just impulsively jumping into things where you're going to regret it later. It's going to cause all this havoc. You're going to end up in the red. You're going to end up making irreversible mistakes. Now, there is a healthy balance, right, between being, risk management versus action, forward momentum, maybe taking risks to, big risks, big payouts sometimes. So there is that balance, but there needs to be at least the thought with some of the strengths that the six bring. They do really love certainty as much as possible. Um, just not knowing. And sometimes that's the reasoning behind those questions. Again, it's not because I necessarily have an opinion on if it's the right move or not, but I'm asking so that I can fill in those gaps because otherwise I'm filling in those gaps myself with kind of worst case scenario. And that uncertainty can make me feel really, um, unclear, unstable. I can get a little anxious. And I think most of us as humans like a little bit of that certainty, some more so than others need more than others. Um, so there's that. They want to be able to trust their coworkers. And this is, I think, sometimes where that type 8 energy overlaps is again, they don't necessarily want you to, be brutally honest and, hurt their feelings and say something that they're going to think about for the rest of their life. That very well may be true. But they also are okay with reality, whatever that is, whatever that feedback is, as long as kind of the tone, the delivery, you're managing that, you're thinking about how your words might land, they're going to appreciate that honesty. They're going to be able to trust you more because you're not sugarcoating the truth. You're not putting rose-colored glasses on. You're giving it to them straight. And although they may not love whatever it is you're saying in that moment, they are going to feel like you're somebody that they can trust. They can feel a little bit more certain with. And that is going to help satisfy that feeling need for safety and security because I understand where you're coming from. Um, we'll talk about our type sevens later next time. There'll be the next one in here. But the sevens have a tendency to think, what might go right? What are the possibilities? And a six has a tendency to default to what could go wrong. Um, do we have a plan? What is the plan? Who's got my back? Can the people on my team be trusted? So there tends to be kind of two schools of thoughts when we approach our relationships with people, maybe our manager, our teammates, and it's, I'll trust you until you give me a reason not to. That is not all the time, but that tends to be how our sevens, our nines, our twos, maybe our threes might show up. Our type sixes are going to have a more skeptical approach and think, I'll trust you once you give me a reason to trust you. My default is not to trust you at first. So they're thinking, who can I trust? Who's got my back? And then that feeling of security comes from their support system, those alliances that they build by understanding and knowing and trusting who does have their back, by shared responsibility and through being prepared. Always when we have type specific coffee mugs, and the type saying for the type six is planning for the worst, or no, let's see, prepared for the worst, but planning for the best. And so there's constant planning, hoping for the best though. They are very dependable, committed. They're excellent troubleshooters, great contingency planners. As much of a reputation as they do get for being anxious and maybe fearful, as we mentioned before, many sixes will say, yes, until the crisis actually hits. And then I know that I'm ready for it. I know that I got, backup batteries, as simple as that. Or I know that, okay, we can pivot to plan B or C because I've already thought through this worst case scenario and I know exactly what I do. So they can actually be incredibly, powerful and the person that people look to in a time of chaos because of that ability to plan ahead, be ready to troubleshoot. They are really great team players. They are deeply invested and care about the group's success, not just their own. I mentioned they can be very courageous under pressure because they have a plan. Now, sometimes when they overuse their strengths, they can overthink a little bit, that ability to think ahead and plan and what if, worst case scenario, am I ready? Can lead to overthinking, and it might be kind of paralysis analysis. That overthinking can lead to catastrophizing. We'll joke sometimes that do not, and I don't think anybody loves this, but especially sixes will say, if you say, hey, swing by my office after lunch today, I want to talk to you about something. Sixes might start, we'll laugh and say they might start packing up their desk and think, okay, well, I'm getting fired, so I might as well get ready for it. Okay, yep, I'm getting ready to get the boot. And it turns out, oh, it's something very low key, or your boss is actually telling you something great that you did. But sixes have a tendency to catastrophize. They might second guess themselves. Um, they tend to have very strong opinions about sometimes right or wrong, what is going to be the best path for the team. Sometimes they do have very strong opinions because they see, hey, we didn't think this through. We don't have the budget. We don't have the resources. This is actually a bad decision. And many times they're okay with speaking up about it. Now, where that doubt comes in, though, is about themselves. They have an inner committee we'll talk about sometimes, and it's not necessarily negative, it's just a lot of voices. So we could do this, or I could do this, or I could do this, or I could do this. And it becomes kind of overwhelming paralysis analysis. It's like, oh my gosh, there's so many voices, so many options. I don't know what's the right, quote unquote, right one. What's the best thing to do? Let's see, what else? Overuse strengths. And then, sometimes that healthy dose of questioning, clarifying, helping people see the potential risks before they do jump can become very pessimistic, can become very skeptical and feel kind of negative. And they're never on board. They're spending so much time thinking about what might go wrong that they have a really hard time of also spending time thinking about what might go right. And so you're never going to be able to stop thinking what might go wrong. So go ahead and do that, but then also make sure you're contributing to the conversation and yourself looking for, okay, what could go right? What's best case scenario? What's the likely scenario? And of course, you're going to think, what's the worst case scenario? And then sometimes they do have an interesting relationship with authority. They're very sensitive to power dynamics. And again, can this person be trusted? This person is in charge of my livelihood, potentially as my manager. Can they be trusted? If not, I'm going to have, be a little skeptical. I might be a little standoff. I might have a lot of questions. And I might push back. And that could cause some tension in that relationship with the manager or potentially with another coworker. Um, how type six will show up at work, kind of their go-to work style. We've talked about they really value clarity and certainty, structure as much as possible, predictability as much as possible. Um, our back end workshop coordinator is a type six. And I've said to her, like, I started kind of managing her and that workflow like I would want to be managed. And so I prefer very hands off. Here's the end goal. However you get there, great. I don't care. Just here's the goal. And I had said to her a while back, I said, here's what needs to happen. However you want to do it is best. Like whatever you think is best, I'm good with. And she said, oh no. Oh no. I'm nervous. I don't like that. Can you just tell me exactly what to do? And so again, if you're leading a type six, there's going to be a balance of supporting them in the way that they need to be supported and led, and also potentially giving them opportunities to grow and step out of that comfort zone. They tend to ask really thoughtful questions, although sometimes it might be misunderstood as negative or skepticism. They work really well when the expectations are clear and the roles are clear. Again, they may not agree with everything, but that clarity, that predictability is going to be really important to them. And then they may look for some reassurance, especially in times of change. How am I doing? Am I doing okay? Am I gonna get fired? Am I an asset? How, just let me know how I'm doing, because otherwise, again, I'm gonna fill in the gaps with my own story, probably worst case scenario. So as much communication, details, information that you can give your type 6 teammate, the more supported, seen, less stressed they're going to be. Like any type, they can also make really great leaders. Their leadership style, again, is known as the guardian. They're very protective of the team, of the organization, wanting to be on the lookout and address any unnecessary risks, making sure you don't step in anything. They build trust with their teams through consistency and follow through and clear expectations and information. They tend to champion policies, processes, procedures, preparedness, and that just helps everybody feel clear, safe. We know what we're getting ourselves into. The challenge sometimes with the type 6 leader, and I've heard this firsthand, as many strengths as they have, we all have our challenges. Every single type, every single person. For the type 6, it can be that they can become overly cautious or maybe even overly controlling when they're stressed. And then especially once they've kind of tapped out their own type 6 coping mechanisms in times of stress, they will move over to the type 3 stress tendencies and start to try those. It's like opening, okay, I'm trying to open this door. My type 6 coping mechanisms aren't working. Let me try a different way. Maybe instead of pushing, I'll pull, and I'll pull with the type 3. So that may look like workaholism. A lot of times working from a place of anxiety, and then as a leader, that might trickle down on their team as well and cause their team to feel overworked. We don't have time for rest. We don't have time to celebrate wins. So just something to be cautious of as a 6, which I know you're already cautious of. Now, what I hear from type 6s around pet peeves and preferences is I hate uncertainty without any explanation, sudden changes with no communication, leaders who avoid accountability or clarity, and then being dismissed for asking too many questions. They prefer, on the flip side, clear communication. They prefer realistic timelines, and they're good. We talked about their inner committee. We'll also talk about in our workshops their inner BS system, alert system. And so they know it's like, wait a minute, this isn't actually realistic. This timeline isn't realistic. What you're saying isn't realistic. I think what you're saying is different from your intentions. So they're on the lookout for that. And that timeline, what's realistic goals, realistic timelines is going to be something that they'll really appreciate. Transparency as much as possible about decisions and expectations. Feeling included and informed is important. Again, some of us are more up here, just high level, big picture. Please do not tell me any more details. Just give me kind of the one sentence, send it in the email. Like if you can put it in the subject line, fit it in there, great. Like that's the level of detail I want. And so we have to remember that other people like a little more. And so when possible, giving maybe a little backstory, giving some additional stats, citing the sources, whatever that might be, and just slowing down to answer questions. And then in a leader, they really do want that leader to be someone that they can rely on, that is consistent, that does what they say, that follows through. So when you're giving feedback to a type 6, and this might be really relevant as we close out the year and sitting down for end of year and kickoff meetings, how to give feedback to a 6. You want to be direct, you want to be honest, and you want to be specific. No surprise there, right? Based on what we've talked about so far about what they appreciate. You want to reinforce trust and reliability before the critique. So this isn't something that you're just going to be able to sit down and create. If you have to give some hard feedback to a 6 and you're going to want them obviously to receive it well, that process really needs to have happened weeks, months, years before of building that trust. Right? Trust isn't just I'm going to sit down and we're now you trust me, right? No, we know that's not how that works. And especially for a 6, and especially if you're giving them something hard, they're going to have an easier time accepting it, receiving it, being willing to change if you have taken the time to build that trust. If you haven't, there might be a little pushback. They might not be as receptive to that, but that doesn't mean you can't, start to build trust for the future. You want to ideally frame any feedback that you're giving them um, around improving clarity, improving the outcomes, improving safety. This is gonna make us, more secure, right? That makes sense. Striving to feel secure, that makes sense. That the feedback would be aligned with that. And then as much as possible, you want to avoid surprises. So give some context, give it early, give them a heads up. If you are going to be talking about something hard. I don't know how your process works, but maybe there's some sort of document that they'll have had a chance to review and process before that conversation. But as much as possible, you want to avoid surprising them. And again, I think that goes for everybody where it's like you don't want to be doing something wrong for the whole year. And then the first time you're hearing about it is in your performance review from your manager. Nobody wants that, right? And so especially a 6. So just be mindful. Hopefully, by the time you've gotten to the sit down, there's been some conversation, some additional information, some additional feedback throughout the year. And then if you are a 6, some things to think about on the receiving end of that feedback is practicing trusting yourself, your decisions, um, looking for proof in the past that you have made good decisions, that you have done things well, that you do know what you're talking about. Because most of the time, our 6s have amnesia. It's like, oh my gosh, they have a whole career uh, of a whole bucket of things that they have done well, that they have gotten right. Um, and they just seem to forget it. Wake up, it's almost like Groundhog Day. They seem to forget it and wake up every day kind of with self-doubting. Maybe I actually don't know what I'm talking about. So, making some sort of um, hype list for yourself, whatever you want to call it, just evidence list, reminding yourself, you know what, even though somebody said this about my performance, and maybe it is true, it doesn't mean this is who I always am, this is what I always do. There's also been a lot of things. So just I think that that's important for the type 6. Um, Asking for clarity instead of reassurance could also be something to think about as you get that feedback. And then just, noticing when your questions become self-doubt. And that could be a really interesting kind of journal reflection question, could be a really interesting question with your therapist, maybe something that you do talk about with your manager. What is that? What's that line? What's that balance? right there. And then we have our three instinctual biases for our type six. And again, I mentioned probably these have the most vast expression, different ways of expression of a type six, but it will all come down to striving to feel secure. And so there is a type, our transmitting type six, most likely that has a tendency to express behavior that might look like a type 8. But at the end of the day, it's that striving to feel secure versus striving to feel powerful that makes the 6 a 6. It's that root logic, it's not the behavior. So for our instinctual biases, I started with the transmitting, so let's do that. This is the type. Our transmitters want to leave a legacy. They are a little bit more risk tolerant, which is almost opposite of the type six. They want to do something deeply meaningful, maybe go against the status quo, which for many sixes the status quo is safe. It's the least risk. Just do the tried and true proven method. But when you pair it with the transmitter, again, you get some almost opposite energy here. So this type out of all the sixes is going to be more assertive, more bold, and what you probably will see on the internet as the counterphobic type. They tend to fight when they have fear. We've talked about the fear or what is it? Fight, flight, freeze. I've also heard that there's the foe, befriending somebody when you're scared. But this is definitely the okay. I'm backed into a corner. I'm scared. Rather than flight, I am going to fight head on. And again, that's some of those 8 look-alike behaviors. Um, so something to keep in mind if you're kind of torn between a 6 or an 8. The next one is when we overlap the navigating instinctual bias with the type 6. This type is very oriented towards the group, the safety of the group, belonging. They are deeply invested in team dynamics and fairness. And this one, might look like some of the sixes that you read about. They are looking for safety, security in groups. Our transmitting type 6 are looking through safety and security through leaving their legacy, through doing deeply meaningful work. And then our type preserving, when you overlap that preserving instinctual bias with the type 6, this is probably the most textbook stereotypical 6. It is not every six's experience though. And this is the type where they are focused on physical and practical security. Do we have enough resources? Do we have backups? That kind of contingency planning, very, very much evident here. Rule followers who prepare for the worst, appreciate stability. So if you are struggling between am I a 1 or am I a 6, this might be something to look more into. On the internet, most places you'll see this called the self-preserving 6. When we follow the awareness to action framework, it's the preserving 6 because it is not just about preserving themselves. It really is looking out for others as well as themselves. So, some things to think about, ways that you will see these, the striving to feel secure expressed very differently. And so, preservers tend to feel secure in having enough resources, taking care of their health and wellness, taking care of their quote unquote nest, whatever that is, at the home, at the office. Do I have enough pins? Do I have my computer backed up? Do I have cyber security? Whatever those type of things are going to help them feel secure in that way, looking for that. Our type 6 is connected to the type 3 and the type 9. They do tend to resist the type 9 the most. Sometimes in the awareness to action framework, they'll call that your neglected strategy because 9s have a tendency to go with the flow, allow things to happen, sit back, don't argue. And that seems like it's like that is almost in complete conflict with the beliefs and the approach of the type 6, but there's so much growth to happen there when they can bring in some of the strengths of the 9, which is that calmness, the a different perspective. They might practice slowing their mind down. That might allow their nervous system to kind of regulate and slow down a little bit. Letting go of that hypervigilance when um, safety is already built in, right? You don't, it's like, okay, all right, you have some things in place. Things are steady. You have proof. There's evidence of you doing a good job. Your company's fine. Maybe in those situations, you can bring that hypervigilance down a little bit and channel some of that go with the flow of the type 9. I hear 6s say, "Oh, sure, I can go." I can go with the flow if I know it's time the flow starts. So you're not gonna become a 9. You're not gonna act like a 9. But what strengths of the 9 might help support, even at work? What are some things that might support you in your role with your next year's goals at work? And then the other arrow, there's some growth opportunities to tap into the type 3 with your confidence and decisiveness specifically. So maybe taking action before certainty is 100% there. Owning your competence and your leadership presence. So many 6s, we talked about having that evidence bucket or evidence list, whatever you want to refer to it, your hype list, because you have done hard things. You've made great decisions. You are capable of leadership. And so just embracing that like a 3 has a tendency to do. Again, you don't have to become a 3, but what are some ways that you can pull in that striving to feel outstanding to support your goals as you grow in your type 6ness? So a couple of kind of experiments, things to play around with, actions to take beyond this episode. If you are a 6, maybe asking, okay, what evidence do I already have that I can handle this? That goes back to that evidence list, your hype list. Make a decision. And it doesn't have to be a life-altering decision. I maybe wouldn't start out with high-stakes decisions, but what small decisions, like maybe picking the restaurant the group goes to? Make a decision without asking for reassurance. And then if you do have concerns, rather than running people through a test um, to determine how trustworthy they are, maybe sharing your concerns directly could be an opportunity for you to grow in that area of trust and again believing people, not thinking the worst, still probably preparing for the worst, but planning for the best. And then if you happen to work for a type 6, some things to do to help support them as a manager or as a teammate is communicate. This is probably the biggest one. If you only take away one of these, um, communicate as early as possible and as often as possible, especially during times of change. So, mergers, new team members joining, new leadership, changes in processes inside the organization. Just, you may not need it. There may be many on your team who don't need that level, but there will be some, and 6s are one of them, that love that extra. It just feels extra supportive with that information and those additional details. You want to, as much as you can, um, praise, compliment, acknowledge their ability to foresee potential threats, to their ability to diligently prepare for those potential risks. Again, there'll be a balance of, and it might test your patience at times, but that is such a strength. That is something that they are constantly thinking about, probably doing often. And so to see it as a strength and to be acknowledged as an asset can mean the world to a type 6. Talk about building up trust. So don't dismiss their questions. They tend to be asking those questions for the sake of the protection of the team. So those are your experiments, whether you're a type 6 or a type working with a type 6, trying to support a type 6. You just want to affirm as much as possible that, they actually are very courageous. You appreciate their ability to be prepared. You appreciate how they watch out for the group. And so, you know, I think more than any other type, this type can get a negative reputation, and most of them will say, I don't want to be the one to ask these questions, but nobody else is asking them. And so it can mean so much to them for you to see those questions, that concern, the risk assessment as a strength and something that you appreciate and the rest of the team appreciate. So, as always, if you happen to be a 6 or work with a 6 and feel like, oh, you got to add this, or here's an example of this, a real world story, I always love to hear from you. And please share those over at enneagramMBA.com/contact. Just drop your feedback, your additional experience or specific example of being a 6 in the workplace in there, and I'll share it in a future episode. Our next type in the series will be type 7. I'm not sure today if we'll do the type 7 or if we'll do some end of year ways to use the Enneagram. So stay tuned. Either way, I hope to see you back. I hope to have you back next week. Thank you for being here. If you happen to be joining us for the first time, welcome. If you happen to be listening, thank you for coming back. If you happen to be a regular listener, welcome back. Always happy to have you. We are starting to book out even until April in the summer for 2026. So if you have a team summer retreat, if you want to kick off a Enneagram workshop series for the 2026, we have all the things to help you be introduced to the Enneagram, start to use the Enneagram in your own professional development, potentially leadership development, as well as using it for communication and collaboration among your team. So reach out. You can find initial options over at enneagrammba.com. And then we're always able to create something specific based on your topic, your event, the amount of people. We will make it work for you. So with that, appreciate you being here, and I'll see you in the next one.